Hi everybody and welcome to another Social Blueprint interview where we interview, and today it's a return guest, people in the community who you may or may not know, but everybody has a story and is here to help you. But before we get to today's interview, we just want to let you know, sign up to the Social Blueprint. We are the hub of the community. In Melbourne, the largest events calendar. Times are tough economically. Well, if you want resources on how to save money, we have them. Aged care, so much information there. And of course, Israel and what to do. And we're going to talk more about it right now. But all you have to do is sign up and it's completely free. Now, Charlotte Korchak, a returning guest who many of you probably would know from social media already, and her Jerusalem Education Institute is here, and we are going to learn today what to say, how to respond, and really just how to educate ourselves. And with that, Charlotte, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me again. It's good to be back.
Hey, Charlotte, it's really an opportune time because there was a social media post that went quite viral from you about a week ago. Accidentally. But it really, in all seriousness, it did touch home here, especially in Melbourne, where I believe we may have the largest Holocaust survivor population. So it really did home.
Yeah.
Are you still, after all this time, surprised to see what took place?
So first, for those who might not know, I was at Auschwitz last week for my first time ever, and I was joining a group of high school students from Miami, Florida. And after going through our tour, I went out to take a photo on the train tracks leading into Auschwitz with my Israeli flag. And very quickly, I was approached by a young, we think Spanish maybe, girl, who decided to kind of verbally attack me, asking me if I was ashamed for holding the Israeli flag at Auschwitz. And to answer your question, I even said it in my video that I filmed afterwards that, most things in the world of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism don't surprise me anymore.
Right.
I expect those things. I never expected it on the train tracks of Auschwitz.
Yeah.
That was a new low that I think we've reached.
But I have to say, and this is part of the education piece, and you are an educator at heart, your response, you really were able to control, in my opinion, the conversation with, and I watched it a couple of times, I must confess, rapid speaking.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say hostile, but you were very aggressive, if you will. Is that a learned skill that we all need to have?
It's definitely a learned skill, but I would say, look, in most situations, you shouldn't be aggressive. And I was trying to not be aggressive. I was more trying to be firm, I think is the word that
Maybe I'm using the wrong word.
Yeah, no, that's okay. But I was trying to be really firm. No, I have nothing to be ashamed of, right? Like anybody with any flag would have something to be ashamed of. But no, broadly, no, I have nothing to be ashamed of for supporting the Jewish state of Israel, especially on the train tracks of Auschwitz. I was talking to a friend of mine after, and he said to me, when I went there as a teenager, I wore that flag around me, and to me that was like my security blanket, right? It was my reminder that this can't happen in my generation because we have this country, and that's why we wear this flag. So yes, I think, first of all, it is a learned skill. How to engage in any conversation is a learned skill. And also knowing in those moments, what is my goal, right? And I had to, in rapid moments, I almost say when she approached me, it was happening almost in slow motion, because in my head, I started to go, oh my God, is this really happening? Is she coming up to, is this happening at Auschwitz? And I had to get into a different mindset because I wasn't in that mindset. When I go to a college campus, when I go and set up a stall or I'm speaking, I expect that. So I'm in that mindset. I was not. And so I had to rapidly kind of think, okay, I need to respond. And then very quickly, the Jewish students that I was with ran up and surrounded me. And then it really became, I have to be firm and I have to show pride. I have to answer as much as I can to the best of my ability, whatever she was throwing at me.
Right.
But most importantly, in this moment, I needed to show pride and not run away. Yeah. And I think a lot of Jews said to me in response, they said, why didn't you just walk away? Why do you engage with somebody like that? And the response in that moment was, if I walked away, she would have been validated. She would have thought that there was something that we all needed to be ashamed of.
Right.
And in that moment, I needed to show, well, first of all, I needed to stand up for myself, but also show those Jewish students, this is how you show pride in a moment where somebody's not going to listen to you.
Yeah.
And the only thing you can do is show them, no, I don't have something to be ashamed of. I am very proud to be a Jew, and I'm very proud to be a Zionist and support the Jewish state of Israel.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that I support every action of the government or every decision that's made in the war in Gaza. But I support the existence of that country, and me holding that flag says nothing other than that, unless you ask me a question, and then we can have a real conversation about what that might mean to me or to you.
Right. And just so what you just said there about having a real conversation. Now,
Right.
changing it a little bit, if
Yeah.
somebody does engage with you, and again, it's about a skill that,
Yeah.
let's just say that they're certainly not hostile, but they're maybe more uneducated.
Yeah.
How do you go about that type of conversation,
Great.
especially from a tone point of view?
Absolutely. So first of all, I always say you have to stay calm.
Yep.
Right? And I would actually say, I watch back the Auschwitz video a lot also, and all I look at is all the things I did wrong.
Okay.
And I was a little aggressive or very firm in my language. I cut her off a lot. I kind of stepped forward towards her, which can be seen as aggression, even though I really only did it because I was losing my footing on the train tracks. But that doesn't matter when it comes to the optics. But first thing is you have to stay calm. You have to stay composed, and you can never get, too aggressive or insulting or unprofessional.
Right.
You got to really maintain your calm, which is the hardest thing. Like, it's easier said than done. And I always say to people, to do that, what you should remind yourself of, first, take a deep breath. That's, I think, most important to calm your nerves. And then remind yourself that you're really representing more than yourself in that moment. Yeah. You're representing the Jewish people. You're representing Israel. And you want to represent them in a positive way. Yeah. So that's number one. And that's how I try to stay calm and not let them get a rise out of me. And then the next big piece that I always say if you want to have an effective conversation is, more often than not, when people challenge us or when people ask us questions, not even in a hostile way, just, isn't Israel committing a genocide in Gaza? I keep hearing that, right? That's a polite question. That's not somebody who's coming at you aggressively.
No.
The first thing is that you have to do in any conversation is you have to validate that person. Okay. That's how you're going to get them to listen to you. So if somebody says there's a genocide in Gaza, I can't say, well, yeah, you're right. That's a very strong validation that I can't give in that moment. But I can say, I completely understand your concerns. A lot of people have died in Gaza.
Right.
There is a really tragic war going on there right now.
And it's impossible not to see the images and feel it.
Exactly. And I'm glad that you do. And I'm glad that you feel that way, because we should be in tune with these things in the world, and they should be impacting us. So you validate them first, because with that validation will come a space where then they might be more willing to receive what you then have to say, which is, that being said, and don't say but. I'm very big on don't say but, okay? Because it negates everything you said before, and you don't want to do that. You believe in what you said before. There is a war, and it is tragic. And you say, that being said, I disagree with the framing of genocide, because that word means something, and it doesn't fit this conflict. Now, that being said, again, there is a war, and many people are dying. And then you explain it, right? You explain why, what's the context of the war, what is genocide, why is this not one? And then hopefully after you validated, they're more willing to listen to that answer. I think the biggest thing though, and it's a word that I use often, is transparency. When I talk about Israel, I don't just talk about Israel. I also talk about the Palestinians.
Right.
I'll give you a stupid story, but I went to get my nails done a couple months ago where I live in the middle of nowhere, Illinois, where nobody knows Jews and doesn't know much about Israel. And I sat down and she looked at my dog tag and she said, what is your dog? What is that? And I started to explain to her about October 7th, because that's the point of this. And I could have left it there. I could have just explained about October 7th and the hostages and what they did to us, said nothing about Gaza. I knew in that moment if I didn't, no human being on this planet right now, unless you're in, the Amazon, has not heard about what's going on in Gaza. And if I didn't mention it, she would then see me as somebody who only sees one side of this conflict.
Right.
And then I'm not a credible source, because I'm only going to give you the Israel side. And so I said what happened on October 7th, and I said that led to Israel having to go into Gaza and start this war against Hamas, or continue this war, I should say, against Hamas. And I then explained to her the context of the war. And by the end, she was like, you're really informed, and you gave me a lot of really legit, like what I feel like was very truthful information, and I really appreciate it. And so be transparent. Don't be afraid to talk about Gaza. Don't be afraid to talk about the Palestinians. Don't be afraid to say there are people starving in Gaza. It's a truth. It's wrong for the New York Times to put a bunch of photos of kids with other diseases to make it an even more dramatic situation than it already is. But that doesn't negate the fact that there are people starving in Gaza. The question is, why are they starving? And how can we stop that? And is Israel the only one to blame for that? Or are there other forces at play here that are also causing that? Because when you only blame Israel, well, then that's only one thing that you're solving. You're not solving all the other issues of getting food to people in Gaza.
Yeah.
You have to be transparent. So validate, be open and honest, because the facts are on our side.
Yeah.
And that's what you need to stand firm in. The facts are on our side. That doesn't mean that Israel's perfect or that every action that we've taken in this war is perfect. But overall, we've done a really good job.
And also, would you, as a tactic, what seems to be lost, especially here in Australia, is people don't link back to the hostages.
Yes, I mean, I think that is the number one point. Because when somebody says, well, this war is pointless, or when somebody just says to you, well, why not a ceasefire? Look at all the suffering.
Yeah.
We always have to say, but what about our hostages? You know? And I look at people and I say that. I say, if you said to me, Hamas has to release all the hostages, and then there should be a ceasefire, most of us would agree with you. Most Israelis would agree with you. But you don't. You leave out the hostages. They're ignored. They're neglected. So yes, we always take it back to the hostages. But again, with the hostages who are also being starved, and this time intentionally starved, unlike the people in Gaza, yeah, there are people starving. Our hostages are starving and people in Gaza are starving. And when you can talk about both, then again, it becomes more nuanced and people can receive that message in a much more palpable way. Because they're sitting there going, okay, so you're worried about 20 people and I'm worried about 2 million people. Because that's what they say. I'm worried about the 2 million people in Gaza. You're just worried about these 20 people. Okay, but those 20 people are human beings. And they did nothing wrong other than go to a party or live in their homes, and they were kidnapped out of their beds and taken to dungeons in Gaza. And so, of course, the hostages are the main focus. That is why we fought this war. That's what we're trying to do to get them back. We put military pressure on Hamas so that Hamas will come and make a deal. That is the broader conception of how we're going to get our hostages back, right? And so it always has to go back to the hostages, reminding people why this war is still happening and that Israel can't abandon them.
No, it's a psyche that you and most people would know. It's just not going to happen in Israel, is it?
No.
Now, Charlotte, down here, and obviously, you know, these massive protests, as Jews here, what would you do? Broad question and tough question.
No, I mean, I get it. First of all, I would say, this is going to sound bad, but there are some elements where you have to kind of ignore the shouting, okay? And you have to remember that 100,000 people in a country of
25 million.
25 million, certainly. Thank you. It's a tiny number ultimately, okay? And the question is, what about those other 24.9 million, right? Who are they? Where are they? Where do they stand? How can I influence them?
Right.
They always talk about, I think I did this last time also on the podcast, about the 595. I'll just repeat it. 5% of people out there, they're Zionists. They're on your side. 5% are anti-Zionist. They are never going to listen to you. They are never going to change their perspective. They are the closed-minded that will forever remain anti-Zionist.
Yeah.
But there's 90% of people in the middle. Now, of course, those numbers are fake. Don't take them as real. They're just for the sake of explaining this dynamic. 90% of people who might lean dramatically that direction. And I would actually argue some of those 100,000 protesting on the bridge were those people who lean that direction, but they're still in the 90%. They've been captivated by the anti-Zionist narrative. But on their own, you could influence people.
Yeah.
And so what I would say to Jews is I would say, you gotta put on your activist hat to a certain extent. And you have to realize that every day you could be an activist for the Jewish people and for Israel. And you do that through one-on-one conversations.
Right.
You can't convince a mob, but one person who's your friend, who's your peer, who's your colleague, you know, the people that you go out for drinks with, it's an uncomfortable conversation.
Right.
But find the time to have it. When somebody says to you, you know, how are you? You can just say to them, I'm struggling.
Right.
If you're asking honestly, I'm struggling, and they're going to say, oh my God, why? And then you can open up the conversation about anti-Semitism. And some might say, yeah, but what about what's going on in Israel? That's fine. It's an opening to you having the conversation.
Right.
The reality is right now, more than ever, we need to have conversations with everybody and anybody who is willing to listen. And that is how slowly you will pull people over to that side of being a Zionist, being pro-Palestinian, wanting to actually find a better future, as opposed to the anti-Zionist narrative, which is we have to destroy Israel for there to be a better future. Which I just think is, if you say that to a rational person, they're going to take a step back and say, wait a second, that doesn't sound right. Right? You're preaching, I can exist and they can exist side by side. And that's how we have to find, that's the path that we have to find. We have to find the path to get there.
You sound like the reasonable person.
You sound like the reasonable person when the other person's saying, no, we have to destroy this evil in the world, right? Zionism, right?
Yeah.
And so have those conversations. Be able to define Zionism for somebody, like I had to do when I was stopped at Border Patrol and they started to challenge me on my politics.
And can you just give that definition? Because I've heard it before, a short one.
The Zionism is the belief in a Jewish state in the land of Israel. The belief in a Jewish state in the land of Israel. I'll say it again. It's short, it's simple, it's a definition that all Zionists agree with. We don't agree on much else, by the way, okay? What's a Jewish state? What's the land of Israel? It gets complicated. We're a pluralistic, nuanced movement, okay, with a lot of different ideas. But the fundamental is that you believe in a Jewish state in the land of Israel. And you can look at somebody and say, what is evil about that?
Yeah.
Why is that evil? Now, are there extremes within the Zionist camp that the word evil is a bit too deep, but are bad, are racist, are problematic? Yes, there are.
Right.
And the tragedy of how the world sees the Zionist community, is they only look at that extreme.
Right.
And I tend to always say to people, when they point out the extremes, I always say, you know what? How about this? I won't judge you by the worst of your kind. Don't judge me by the worst of my kind.
Right.
Because we always have bad. Every group has
1%.
bad. There's always, and the question is, are they the minority or are they the majority? And in the Zionist community, they are by far the minority. Talk about how you feel. Talk about how anti-Semitism is affecting you.
Yeah.
And explain that no matter what Jews are doing or Israel is doing, there's no justification for anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Because you never judge one group by some of the people within that group. You wouldn't do that for Black people. You wouldn't do that for Indigenous people. You wouldn't do that for any camp within this country. Why Jews? And when you start to have that conversation, I genuinely think one-on-one, that's how we're going to make a change. Grassroots. It's not the social media battle. We have to still fight it, but it's lost. We have to acknowledge that we're not winning it.
Yeah.
Okay, we're outnumbered, and it's a game of slogans and placards. It's not nuanced. It's not real information.
Yeah.
And Israel's complicated. It's not something that you can just in slogans convince somebody of something or influence somebody. We have to have a real conversation, and that's not happening on social media. It's a lost battle, but we have to still be present there, because when there's no voices, then people think that everything that's being said is true.
So do you engage, I have to stop you on social media then?
Sometimes, honestly, there's two times that I'll do it, okay? One is if somebody comments on a video and they just spew complete outright misinformation, I feel obligated as an educator to correct the misinformation. And it's not for that person. I don't think that person's gonna read it and be like, oh, I didn't know that. Thanks so much for informing me. But it's all my other followers. It's all the other people reading the exchanges who see it and say, oh. And then the real person is gonna Google what I said and Google what they said. And what I say will always be backed up with facts. And so that's one moment where I'll do it, not for, again, that person, but for everybody else.
Right.
And the other times is sometimes, people will send me private messages and I'm curious. I want to know what arguments they're making. I want to learn from them, not because I think I'm going to influence them. And then sometimes, the rare occasion, I do influence them, but mostly not. But I do it, I'm almost a glutton for punishment. I'm like, all right, what argument are you making today? I need to know it so that I can combat it, so that I know what to teach, my students on how to respond to these things. So yes, sometimes I do, mostly I don't. People always say don't read the comments. I'm not one of those people. I read all of the comments. Okay. And every so often I'm very compelled to respond when they're public, Private is a different story. Yep. Private, I think you can, one-on-one conversations are great if the person seems like they'll listen, but oftentimes they won't. And then it's really just a waste of your time. And time is valuable, and you have to know when to cut your losses. And sometimes I'll say that to somebody. That's how I'll end it. I'll say, honestly, we're not getting anywhere here. I have really much more important things to do with my time. Like, good luck, peace out. And then I end the conversation. They'll continue. And I usually, then I'm at that point, I'm done. So they can spew, and it doesn't bother me anymore. So.
And also, just switching a little bit here, but it's legitimate questions. I had somebody ask me in the other day in the workforce where they said, we see all these protests in Israel, like what's going on? What is a good response to that?
So Israel's a democratic country, first of all, which is great, right? That's always, there's a lot of rhetoric out there about Israel not being democratic. And so, first of all, how amazing, it's a democratic country where people can go out and protest. And it's an explanation of Israel's a democratic country. We had an election in November of 2022. That was our last election.
Right.
So it's been 3 years, and a lot has happened in those 3 years. And there's a lot of frustration and disappointment by some in Israel with how the government has been conducting themselves. Before October 7th, there were protests, and after October 7th. But really, these protests are very much about wanting to see the hostages home and an end to the war, if that means an end to the war. We want our hostages home, and for some Israelis, if that means ending the war and Hamas will remain in some kind of power, or at least, they've been so diminished, but if that means that they're at least going to remain in existence, then we're ready to make that sacrifice. Right. There's others who would say make a deal, but try to make it so that eventually Hamas won't be there, whatever it is, but that's what the protests are about. They're not, people like to frame them abroad as, it seems like even Israelis are against the war. Why doesn't the government, why doesn't the government just end the war? And the media, when they report on the protests, what they tend to consistently leave out is that the protests are almost exclusively about the hostages. Of course, there are some who make them political in Israel, but it's about getting the hostages home.
Right.
And if that means an end to the war, okay. But they're not protesting for an end to the war. They're protesting to get the hostages home. And whatever that means.
Right.
And that's the most important part that the media is leaving out, because again, they're trying to continue to preach this witch hunt against this, or it's not a witch hunt, but they're trying to continue to say the Israeli government's bad, and look, even Israelis are against their government.
Yes.
And it's a real surface way of, a superficial way of looking at what's actually going on in Israel and what these protesters are really asking for. And how even in these protests, there are people who probably voted for people in this government.
Right.
But right now, their biggest concern is the hostages.
That's really interesting. And it goes back to that point about making sure that when we are engaging with people that do want to somewhat listen, is to linking those two up.
You got to. You have to. The hostages are the epicenter of this whole thing.
And
This all
especially
could
the
have
famine
ended a long
question,
time
yeah.
ago. Think about all of the wars we fought in Gaza, all the different operations we've had in Gaza. They ended relatively swiftly.
Right.
A few weeks, a month, right? This has gone on for 2 years, almost 2 years. And the reason is because of the hostages, because you cannot abandon them. You just can't. It's a social fabric in Israel. The social fabric would decay if the understanding is you could be kidnapped from your bed and your government's not going to do everything in their power to bring you home.
Yes.
It's almost a social contract, if you will.
Yes.
And so there's such a fear in Israel of what happens if we abandon the hostages. What's that message to Israelis moving forward? And so again, it's so weird because we have one conversation in Israel and the world is having a completely different conversation.
Tell us more about that.
There's such a dissonance. And first of all, you can talk about the Israelis and then the Jewish community in the diaspora, where there's such a dissonance, which is Israelis are so hyper-focused in on the war, on the hostages, number one, on reservists. I mean, many people in the diaspora don't know this, but we've had more suicides of soldiers in this war than we've ever had in Israel. It's been awful to watch. We've had reservists who have been away from their families for hundreds of days in the last 2 years. Reservists who have lost their businesses. The economy is struggling in Israel. We don't have enough of a workforce and also a fighting force.
Yeah.
We have a battle when it comes to the ultra-Orthodox being drafted into the army. There's a completely different conversation. Israelis are hyper-focused in on domestic issues. The war, the reservists, the hostages. How do we continue to move forward?
Right.
The diaspora Jewish community is focused on anti-Semitism. Of course they are. That's what they're facing consistently. And they're very scared within their communities. And so then they sometimes look at Israelis saying, how are you protesting against the government? That's not helping. We're fighting two different fights right now. And that's okay. Right. We need to be. The people in Israel need to be fighting the fight that they're fighting in whatever way, whether they're supportive of the government or not. You don't have to be against the government. There's both sides to that argument. But they have to be doing what they need to do there, expressing how they're feeling and supporting themselves, because ultimately it's their economy, it's their future. And diaspora Jews need to be focused on anti-Semitism.
Right.
There needs to be more of an understanding of what each people are fighting. Israelis are starting to feel it. They're flying abroad and they're experiencing anti-Semitism in a dramatic way. People hear them just speaking Hebrew and they're being attacked in restaurants, especially in Europe and in the Mediterranean. And so there's a little bit more of an understanding. Where I think there's still a lack is the diaspora community really truly understanding all of the domestic issues that are playing out in Israel. And then the broader, moving aside from the Jewish diaspora community, the dissonance is, I mean, again, what Israelis are talking about, nobody in the world is talking about. Again, Israelis, you walk around Israel today, you drive around Israel, there is one thing that you will see on every corner of every street in every city, and that's hostage posters. Or signs about bringing our hostages home. It is not something you can escape in Israel at all. It's impossible. And we shouldn't. And that's exactly how it should be. The hostages need to know that we are never going to forget them and that we will fight for them until they come home. And I hope they know that. I hope they remember the Gilad Shalit campaign, which went on for 5.5 years when he was taken captive in 2006 and wasn't released until 2011. And I think they know that, and that needs to be the focus. The world has completely forgotten about October 7th and about the hostages. And the world does not understand that Israelis are literally still living in October 7th. The day has not passed. They have been stuck in that day for the last 2 years. There's been no moving forward. There's been no healing. There's been no overcoming. They're stuck and they will remain stuck. And the world has moved on to Gaza. And Israel...
Is that where we need to interject and make sure that people know?
What?
That the hostages are still there.
Yes, it's because it's the entire context. That's what I said at Border Patrol when they were saying, are you frustrated with, what's going on politically, which was a probing question to try to see, if I was going to come here and spew things against the government. But I looked at them and I said, yes, I'm very frustrated because it seems that the world has forgotten that we still have 20 live, innocent people who are sitting in dungeons being starved to death, actively. And a photo is put out of one of them and it's as if it didn't exist. And yet you have politicians who are ready to recognize a Palestinian state without any preconditions. And I said to them, how can you look at an Israeli and say, stop fighting this war, when my friend's brother is being held hostage? How can you look at me and say that? And both of these women looked at me and said, I don't know how you can say that. And in that moment, it was like it dawned on them. Oh, right. And maybe they didn't know. Maybe they forgot. But the reality is once you remind somebody of that and then you look at them and say, what if it was your kid?
Yeah.
What would you do? And what would you expect your government to do if your kid was the one whose image is now being put out and he looks like somebody in Auschwitz who were intentionally starved until they either died naturally or were murdered in a gas chamber? Like, how, if it was your kid, would you stop at any step? Would you ever stop trying to fight for them? That is the constant reminder. But again, it's always the hostages. And yeah, I want the war to end also because people in Gaza are suffering every day from this war. But that's not the goal of the war.
Right.
The goal of the war is to get the hostages back. It's constantly reminding people and not letting them say, when I said October, I actually, in Auschwitz, the girl next to me said, do you know what happened on October 7th? And the girl who was challenging me said, do you know how many people have died since October 7th?
Right. How did you respond?
And I said, well, I responded by saying, do you know how many Germans died during World War II? Like during this war, right? Because more Germans died than Americans, than Brits, than some of the people that they were fighting. Does that mean that the Germans were on the right side? Does that mean that after we bombed Dresden in February of 1945, that the world should have said, okay, we've gone too far, too many people have died in Germany, it's time to end ceasefire? No. We fought until the Germans laid down their arms and said, we're done. They surrendered. And so it's looking at somebody, this is the key. When you're engaging, people need an alternative. They think, okay, well, I just want the war to end. I say, okay, so do I. But here's the alternative of, instead of insisting on Israel having a ceasefire, the alternative is saying, Hamas release the hostages, surrender, and then the war will end. But for some reason, politicians around the world, the media, have not said that. Instead, they've completely pivoted to just all of it's on Israel. And so going back and constantly reminding people of why we're in this war and how it can so easily end is key to getting somebody to understand. And by the way, a rational person, after you say that to them, will literally stop, I think, in their tracks and say, why haven't politicians been saying that?
Yeah.
Because what people will also say to you when they say, October 7th, but look at what's happened since, they'll acknowledge, I'm not for Hamas, I'm against Hamas. Then why has the onus been on Israel and not on Hamas? You're acknowledging that Hamas is bad. Hamas took hostages. Hamas is bad. They're bad for Israel. They're bad for the Palestinian people. So what can Israel do other than fight a war to either get rid of them or you shout at the rooftops, release the hostages and end the war and Hamas surrender? And then this would be over and everyone would get what they want other than Hamas, which to me is fine. They should be the losers in all of this, right? So it's always going back to that and setting that stage, but also knowing that you're going to get that response, which is, but what about what's happened since?
Yeah.
And the response is, what was the alternative? What were we supposed to do?
Yeah.
When the world wasn't shouting, release the hostages and Hamas surrender, what alternative did you leave Israel with other than fighting this war to try to get our hostages back? You left us no alternative. So here we are. So create the alternative. And then the war could end.
Charlotte, you're giving great responses. You are a world-class educator.
Thanks.
I'm going to turn it a little bit right now. Education, you went to USC, is that correct?
I did, yeah.
But you had...
The University of Southern California
for
the Aussies in Los Angeles.
Okay. But I remember hearing a story. You said that you really had, I guess, a huge mental change in that, you told a story about how you used to stand up in the back of classes to keep yourself awake. Can you just tell us what about?
Well, after I encountered anti-Zionism for the first time on campus in the form of an apartheid wall that was put up on my campus, and I had to kind of challenge people even though I didn't know anything. I knew nothing. I had no information. I had lived in Israel, but I knew very little to nothing about Israeli politics, about Israeli history. And I decided after that encounter to go on a program to Israel called Hasbara Fellowships, which I'm partnering with actually this coming semester on several campuses in the United States. And it's an amazing program that takes students to Israel and exposes them to the conflict and the history, and also gives them training and tools to how to go back to campus and be more effective activists. And it was that trip that was kind of my aha moment, where back in my day, they've made it a lighter schedule for the Gen Zers. But back in my day, when us millennials were on Hasbara, we had very intense schedules. Okay. It was like an 8 a.m. start time or 8 a.m. get on the bus and leave. And we would go sometimes until 9 p.m. And nowadays they end like before dinner and then they just get to go party. But my day, we had to party after 9 p.m. And I remember I'm going on this trip thinking I'm going to Israel and I'm going to have a good time and I'm going to learn and I'm going to party and it's going to be fun. And I did. I learned all day. I partied all night. I would get back sometimes at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd, take a quick nap, shower, and I'd be back on the bus. And of course, that's going to get exhausting. And there was a point where I found myself in classes, and of course you're falling asleep because you got no sleep, but you don't really need sleep when you're 18 years old, 19 years old. But I found myself, if I was ever dozing off, that I would just go and pace in the back of the room. And it was like my moment where I realized, like, I care so much about this topic that I do not want to miss anything. So if I have to pace to stay with it, I'll stay with it. And it was really my aha moment of my life, realizing that Israel, Zionism, the Jewish people was a passion that I had discovered. And I realized I wanted to know everything and I never wanted to stop learning. And then at some point I realized that not only did I never want to stop learning, but I also never wanted to stop educating others in that space. And that's how I got into the field and went on to work for Stand With Us for 15 years and decided this past year to leave and start my own initiative, the Jerusalem Education Institute, to be able to continue to educate and try to implant that, try to really, find those young Jews, those young Zionists who have that same passion and are eager for the knowledge, for the information, and me being able to disseminate that to them in the most effective way possible and most accessible way possible.
And if there is some green light, if you will say, or shining light that's coming out of October 7th, there has been a massive uptick in Jewish education, hasn't there?
Jewish education, Jewish engagement. October 8th Jews was something that has been coined, which are the Jews who kind of woke up to their Jewish identity after October 7th. And it's beautiful, and it's not a derogatory. I think some people think it's derogatory. It's really not. It's this eye-opening moment of I am part of this community, and I need to play a role in this community. The Deborah Messings of our world, right, who had never been to Israel before October 7th, but then got on a plane soon after and exposed herself, and has been a great voice for the Jewish people ever since. And so look, everything. There's always going to be a silver lining. And with the Jewish people, we're lucky that we have suffered tremendously throughout our history, which the luck in that is that we've learned how to survive and we've learned how to overcome and we've learned how to pull the good from the bad, right? We had the Holocaust, and 3 years later, Israel came to be. Not because of the Holocaust. Jews had been building that country for 50 years prior to the Holocaust. Jews had been laying out creating all the necessary institutions so that when the time came, Israel could be established. But 3 years after the worst genocide, the most successful genocide we've seen in this world, that same people who lost a third of their population, 33% of the population, could then go and actually do what needed to be done to create that country. Like that's taking a horrible moment and trying to find the good in it, trying to take it and turn it into something good. And I am such a believer that October 7th could be the absolute catalyst for good. And that's very hard to say now when you look at all the death and all the destruction, but out of that, look at what Europe turned into. Out of World War II, right? I mean, now I would say it's going a bit downhill, but they enjoyed years. I mean, especially Western Europe, years of prosperity and of peace and of quiet, of security, right? And that came on the ashes of World War II. And so it's the same thing. From the ashes of October 7th, we can choose to grab this moment and to do something with it. And look, there are positives. I mean, it's hard to see that in the Western world. But look at the Arab world, who you would have expected would have turned on us well before anybody else, given what's going on and given the fact that there are Arab Gazans who are being killed. And instead, they have not. Saudi Arabia hasn't turned. None of the Abraham Accord countries have turned. Their rhetoric has stayed almost not pro. They come out sometimes and they'll admonish the Israeli government sometimes when they think it's necessary, but mostly they've held it down. Jews still are traveling to the UAE, Bahrain, and it's safer right now to walk around Dubai as a Jew than it is to walk around Amsterdam as a Jew.
Wow.
Right?
True.
And so the positive of that is that we have Arab partners who in this moment where everyone is turning on us, are not turning on us.
Yeah.
And people always say, well, what's the future of Gaza? And I say, well, once Hamas is gone, or at least have lost all power, right? There is an opportunity here to grow a beautiful Gaza. Right? To rebuild a beautiful Gaza. And who can help us do it? Our Arab brothers, our Arab partners who are sitting there, and they don't want another Iranian base in Gaza like there has been for the last 20 years.
Sure.
They want a peaceful Gaza because they're progressing, they're moving forward, and they're sick and tired of the extremes.
Yeah.
They've kicked out the extremes from their own country, especially the Saudis. And so there's so much opportunity here. And it's so sad because everyone's kind of sitting in today. Jews are sitting in the trauma of October 7th. And with trauma, it becomes very hard to see forward.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, as somebody who's tried to really overcome the trauma and look and take those survivor skills that us Jews have honed for the last 3,000 years and say, there is such an opportunity here. It's painful what we're going through, but if we grasp at the right things and if we put our energy into the right places, we can create such a better future from this moment. And there are enough Jews right now, like you said, who have gotten active and want to be part of it, who just need that correct guidance of where to direct their energy to create that better future.
And also on the education side, and this is more getting into, you have something I believe it's coming out towards the end of the year, is that right?
Yeah, I don't know the release date. We're still in post-production, but I have a masterclass coming out. Started out as a crash course that I gave, decided to professionally produce it. So it's a 6-part masterclass that goes all the way back to ancient history and then goes all the way up to modern times. I filmed it in March of 2025, which means it goes up to March of 2025. And it will hopefully go into... go online for sale before the end of the year. And you can purchase it, or if you're an organization and you want to license it to be able to share with your employees, your team, or the people who support your organization who want to get a deeper understanding of Israel, the Middle East, the history that got us to today, and what's happened in Gaza over the last year and a half. That's what it'll be there for. I mean, so many people come to me and say, how can I learn more? How can I get more? And I'm the person who's going to look at them and say, you should probably read a book. And then I get that reaction from Gen Z where it's like, oi, and not even Gen Z, let's be honest. Most people aren't reading anymore these days. It's like, do you have a podcast or do you have a... Well, the masterclass is filmed. And we're hoping to also put it on a platform where we can, if you want to add, quizzes and really take it to the point where you can use it as an educational tool, you can do that as well. So look out for it, Jerusalem Education Institute. You can follow us on Instagram at JerusalemEDU. And of course, when it's ready for retail, we will obviously promote it and blast it out, and that will be available for anyone who wants to, again, deepen their understanding and their knowledge on Israel.
Got it. Charlotte, we have to wrap things up.
Sure.
But just to recap, a couple of the actionable steps when we're engaging with people. First is validate them.
Acknowledge. Yeah.
Then give them an alternative.
Yeah.
And also be linking up the hostages.
Yeah. So yes, hold on. Sorry to interrupt you. Validate and then present context, I think, is really the message. Not the alternative, I think, would come later.
Okay.
It's validate, acknowledge what they're saying as much as you can. Then you reframe to reframe meaning, because that's how I teach. I teach a method. It's called ARM: acknowledge, reframe, message. Okay. And the acknowledgement is that validation we talked about. The reframing is oftentimes a reframing in the sense that the lens that they're looking at you through is just Gaza or just ethnic cleansing, or they're looking at just this thing that's happening, or it's not ethnic, that's not the right example, but let's say they're looking just at Gaza.
Yeah.
And what I need to do is not, what they're saying is not false necessarily, but there's a context that they're missing, right? And that context is what you're saying, the hostages, October 7th, what got us there, and then also what's happening in Gaza. Explain the overarching war, because people think Israel's just indiscriminately firing.
Yeah.
So the second piece is context. Provide that wider frame or correct the frame. So they're talking about genocide. I'm going to correct it to, it's not genocide, it's a war. It's not ethnic cleansing, it's displacement, which happens during war, right? And that's the reframing when somebody says something that's wildly factually incorrect. Like Israel's an apartheid. No, it's a democracy, right? That's the other reframing. And that's where you can kind of start to put in more information. And after the validation, hopefully they're listening. And then you try to leave them with a message. And part of the message could be, give them an alternative. Okay, so you're against what's going on. What's the alternative to ceasefire?
Right.
Release the hostages, Hamas surrender. Or, you know, if it's well, you know, Israel, just this conflict needs to end. Okay, well, what we need is more education. We need more education on the Palestinian side. That's not education for hate, but education for peace, right? And you give them an actionable item that they can then use and steer their activism towards, right? A broader message of, I don't want this. We Jews are out there and we have to defend war. We have to defend, you know, what's going on. And I think if you ask most Jews, they would say, I would really not, I wish that I didn't have to do this because I don't want there to be war. God, if the hostages came home tomorrow, there doesn't have to be war. And so it's very important that with that message is what you deliver to people is, what do you ultimately want? What are your dreams? What do you hope for? What's your hope for the future?
Right.
Because the reality is for most Jews, our hope for the future is a peaceful one.
Yeah.
And if you offered right now to most Jews, not all, because we have our extreme that says from the river to the sea, it all has to be Israel. But for most Jews, if you said, if I could give you right now a state for the Palestinians and a state for Jews living side by side peacefully, and again, you're going to get the eye roll because nobody lives that. But if I said, if that was possible, is that what you would embrace? The vast majority would say 100%. We just let us live peacefully and quietly. And tell that to somebody because they don't believe that that's what Jews think. They don't believe that that's where we're at. The image that they're getting is that extreme that I just presented, which are the Jews who say, no, we don't want that. The Palestinians need to be expelled. They need to go somewhere else. They can't live here. This is the Jewish state. That is a tiny minority of Jews. Now there's a much larger population of Jews who are saying, maybe they need to go somewhere else, not because I want that, but because I don't see another way forward.
Right.
But again, if you present to somebody, my ideal would be all of us being able to live there peacefully.
Right.
That's the truth, and it's what most people don't think about us. And when you say that, all of a sudden their image of you is going to change dramatically. And they're going to see you as a partner in that process and not as an enemy to that process. But you got to get there. And Jews have to get there. We have to heal from that trauma. We have to be able to say, that's my ideal. I don't know how we're going to get there. And that's my struggle, is the how. But that is my ideal. And then all of a sudden, maybe people will soften and be able to see us in a different way and then converse with us in a different way, engage with us in a different way. And all of a sudden, when it comes time to defend Jews in the world, they will stand up alongside us as our allies.
Charlotte, thank you so much for coming back, especially at this time. We will definitely be in touch. I can't wait for the course to come out.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.